on this episode of the WildFed podcast.
The Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation works at the state and federal levels of government to advance and protect hunting, fishing, trapping, and science-based wildlife management.
I worry a lot about threats to our way of life and wondering often if it's something that's secure in the future.
Currently, we have 23 states with the right to hunt, fish, and harvest wildlife included in their state constitution.
Sometimes it feels like the ESA gets a little bit weaponized against hunting in contrast to the spirit of what it was created for.
In New Mexico, trapping was lost on all public land in the state.
The person typically drawn to hunting and fishing is often that rugged individualist, probably pretty turned off by marketing, doesn't really want to get involved.
Voting is the first line to trying to get the right people in the right positions and make sure that they understand wildlife.
Episode 167 of the WildFed podcast, The Right to Hunt with Ellary TuckerWilliams, is brought to you by Surthrival. Man, I'm excited to introduce a new product at surthrival.com. We've teamed up with Hammond's Black Walnuts, and after a year of behind-the-scenes work, I'm proud to finally introduce Surthrival's Black Walnut Protein Powder. This is the most exciting new product I've seen in my 15 years in the health food and nutritional supplement industry. I've been using it for over 6 months every morning in my smoothie and loving it more each day. It fortifies my blended drinks with 17 grams of wild protein per scoop. But the story is even more incredible because the black walnuts in our protein powder are hand foraged from wild native trees. There's no fertilizer, no irrigation, no pesticides used anywhere in the process. No agricultural land is used either, so no habitat is disrupted to produce these nuts. All the foragers are volunteers paid by the pound for their harvests. In other words, when you invest in Surthrival's Black Walnut Protein Powder, it's not just an investment in your health. You're investing in wild lands, wild species, healthy ecosystems, and the people who tend to them. I can honestly say it's hands down the most ethically sourced and produced protein product ever made. It's also the cleanest because we use the same ultra-pure CO2 extraction process used in high-end cannabis extracts. This yields a light-colored raw protein powder far superior to the ones made with higher heat expeller pressing. It's a very fine flour too, so we've used it in more than just smoothies. My wife's been baking it into cookies and muffins, turning them into wild protein fortified snacks, and she uses it in her oatmeal at breakfast too. I'm excited to see all the recipes you come up with using this really versatile ingredient. Wild North American native trees, 100% grown and processed in the USA. Sometimes it feels too good to be true. We've managed to bring a wild, hand-foraged, native North American food to people in a format they can easily use to fortify their diets daily. Head over to surthrival.com to check out the entire product line and use the coupon code WildFed to get an additional 5% off your order. Surthrival's Black Walnut Protein Powder, the first wild protein powder on the market ever. Do you need an antidote to the metaverse? We just launched our newest t-shirt design over at wild-fed.com. It features our antidote to the metaverse tagline on the chest, a WildFed badge on the sleeve, and 2 tarot-style cards juxtaposed on the back, one modeled on the tarot card known as the Fool, who's wearing an Oculus and absent-mindedly walking off the roof of a building with a bag of fast food in one hand and a cell phone in the other. Next to it is a card based on the Magician, who's juggling 4 implements, a fishing rod, a rifle, a trap, and a foraging basket. It represents our belief that a life that includes the outdoors inoculates you against believing that an artificial experience of life could ever replace a natural one. You see, for us, being wild-fed, hunting, fishing, and foraging is about a lot more than just getting our groceries. It's an antidote to the metaverse, an act of rebellion against the transhuman agenda that is leading humanity to abandon the natural world in favor of wearing screens over their eyes to live in a virtual one. We choose the natural over the artificial. We choose an antidote to the metaverse. We choose to be fed by the wild. Check out our new shirt at wild-fed.com. I'm Daniel Vitalis, and you're listening to the WildFed podcast, a show about reconnecting with nature through hunting, fishing, foraging, and food. WildFed. Food is all around you. As someone that came to hunting late in life, someone that wasn't raised understanding the intricacies and nuance of the North American conservation model or how our wildlife resources are allocated and ultimately utilized, I was very impressed with the scope and breadth of our opportunities here in the United States as I started taking advantage of them. The more I participated, the more clearly I saw just how blessed we are here to have the ability to participate in this imperfect but extremely functional system. While it can always and should always be improved upon, when we hunt, we do so with the knowledge that biological, ecological, and even social concerns have been addressed and that system is, for the most part, sound. State and federal wildlife management ensures that population dynamics are strong amongst game species, that there is sufficient opportunity for everyone to participate, and that science is conducted rigorously so that the hunt can be pursued in perpetuity. But what about our right to hunt and fish? Do we really have one? One that's enshrined at the constitutional level? Well, no, not really. At least not in the same way that the First Amendment protects free speech and peaceable assembly, or the Second Amendment guarantees citizens the right to keep and bear arms. But can our right to hunt and fish be protected in similar ways, at least at the state constitutional level? My guest today is Ellary TuckerWilliams from the Congressional Sportsman Foundation, and they are working on that very thing. They're at it around the clock, behind the scenes, protecting our ability to hunt and fish in ways that I'd not heard about before, but now that I have, seem indispensable. They work at the political level, not only to enshrine our rights, but also to protect the heritage of hunting against what is a constant onslaught from groups that would, if they could, slowly erode our legal ability to hunt until nothing remains. As someone who, for the most part, simply interacts at the resource level, I'm glad to know folks like Ellary are out there, communicating with people in our federal and state governments, educating them on issues that matter to those of us who utilize the resources of our landscape. We need that kind of representation in those places that most nature lovers won't or simply don't go, namely in the halls of government. So big thanks to Ellary and the Congressional Sportsman Foundation. Many of us have benefited greatly from the work you do, likely without even ever knowing it. And one quick but important note, both myself and our producer Grant are going on vacation next week. After a very busy year filming season 3 of the WildFed TV show, and before we get started working on season 4, we're both eager to take some time away. So for the next 3 weeks, we'll be going dark here on the podcast, but we'll pick back up with a new episode on Valentine's Day, February the 14th. Until then, enjoy this episode, and we look forward to coming back at you refreshed in a few weeks. Ellary TuckerWilliams, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Daniel.
Oh, I'm really excited to talk to you. You're quite an interesting character. Just sort of reading over your bio, it's been a pretty dynamic career you've had. So I'm really hoping today to talk about your work with the Congressional Sportsman's Foundation. But first, I was wondering if you could kind of give us a little background on who you are, what you do, sort of what your education's in and things like that.
Sure, happy to. Yeah, as you mentioned, my background and kind of journey to working for the Congressional Sportsman's Foundation has been, I would say, not super traditional. I'm originally from Anacortes, Washington, which is about an hour and a half north of Seattle on the coast. Grew up to a strong hunting and fishing family, so it's always been a passion of mine. And always been an interest. I never really knew what I could do in that field, but always knew I wanted to kind of work with the outdoors and thought I wanted to work directly with wildlife. So following that, I went to University of Hawaii at Manoa, where I thought I wanted to be a marine biologist. Got into that and realized that I, in fact, did not want to be a marine biologist.
Could you tell me why? Because lately I've interviewed several marine biologists, and I always joke with them like everybody grows up wanting to be one. And I would love to hear some reasons for not becoming one.
For me, in the classes that I was taking, it was just far too narrow in focus. I wanted to look more so at like holistically at like ecosystems and kind of how all these different things play into it. And the classes that I was taking at marine biology were, more along the molecular side of things. And I understand those are building blocks, but it just wasn't, it wasn't hitting on the things that I wanted to hit on. And the more I kind of expanded what I thought I wanted to do with classes that kind of more piqued my interest, I realized that my true interest kind of developed into something else.
Okay, cool. So sorry, I interrupted you.
No, totally fine. So at University of Hawaii, I kind of was struggling to figure out what I wanted to do. And then I kind of came across natural resource management. And there I was able to tailor it a little bit more to looking at human wildlife conflict resolution, which is where a lot of my interest kind of laid. And in doing so, I did some research projects related to non-commercial or recreational fisheries management. And that kind of led me down a human dimensions pathway, which is essentially the social science side of natural resource management. So how do you manage the people to manage the resource? In Hawaii, they do not have a non-commercial or recreational fishing license. And so that creates a lot of issues, not only from a funding side for the state, but also not knowing how many anglers you have, how much fish is being taken out. It just kind of doesn't have a lot of this information that is kind of really pivotal in managing fisheries. And so I did a survey of non-commercial fishermen, trying to understand what the thoughts were around establishing a hypothetical non-commercial fisheries management. And I say non-commercial fisheries management because a lot of folks in the islands don't particularly care for the term recreational, because they view it as there's recreational side of it and there's subsistence sides of it. And so that was a term that we came up with to make sure that we were taking into account how people that we were surveying felt about the terminology being used. So that's why I use the term non-commercial fisheries management and non-commercial fisheries license. So that kind of tipped me towards the policy and human dimension side of things. I worked in non-commercial fisheries management doing surveys for NOAA after that, as well as some other contract jobs. And then from there, I went to the complete opposite end of the spectrum, and I got my master's degree from Auburn University in Alabama, working on a human dimensions project related to wild pig management. Wild pigs are a big issue in our country, particularly in the Southeast. And so I was basically trying to better understand how to improve management by talking to the different stakeholders that have wild pigs on the land. Alabama and the Southeast Southeast in general is primarily private lands. So you need to be able to coordinate with your private land owners, which are more often than not either forest landowners, hunters, or farmers or ranchers in that state, to be able to manage the pigs, to be able to have the state agencies have access to where these pigs are kind of held up. So again, that was looking at wildlife issues and how to manage them from a social science side, and having that kind of play into the policy related to management. And so that's where I finished up my master's degree. And then this job at CSF came available, and I thought it was a wonderful opportunity to not only highlight and utilize my education, but also expand in areas that I previously didn't have a whole lot of experience, but I thought would make me a much more well-rounded individual, being that I come from a science background, and now being able to see how that plays into policy and wildlife management from a different lens and perspective.
Wow. I'd like to, it's not our focus today, but I'd love to go back to a couple things we were just talking about. One, could you, I think you were calling it a human wildlife conflict. Could you describe that for our listeners, a little bit of what that looks like? I bet everybody can kind of picture one or two examples, but maybe kind of help us understand sort of broadly what that might be and what some of the categories of that might be.
Yeah, so the University of Hawaii at Manoa has this really wonderful program for kind of students like me who find themselves interested in a lot of different things, but those interests don't necessarily align with a pre-designed like degree pathway. Mm-hmm. So I was able to work within, it's called the Interdisciplinary Studies Department, to kind of help tailor my degree to my interests while making sure that those interests hit the necessary requirements for earning that degree. So I can't just like pick a bunch of easy classes and then get my degree and just call it good. Like there's definitely like some rigor to it, but I was able to basically pick these different classes specific to human wildlife conflict and resolution. So Some of those classes were like, again, human dimensions and policy. A lot of it was policy related. Some of it was just your basic wildlife biology and kind of understanding just how that works, so you can be able to understand like maybe why conflicts occur, because a lot of these conflicts occur due to basic biological needs of the wildlife that are happening in areas that are creating conflict with people. And so it was just a really good way to talk about things from an environmental standpoint as well as a water quality standpoint, and how all of these different factors kind of came together related to people's conflict with the natural world and how we can address and mitigate those things moving forward.
But what would be some specific conflicts, just like specific examples? Like, are we talking like I live in California and I wake up, there's a mountain lion in my bedroom? Are we talking about black bears in my garbage cans? Or what are we talking about exactly? The pigs rooting up farmers' crops, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so basically when I was there, we talked a little bit about everything. So, I mean, specific to Hawaii, there was a topic about trying to address monk seals, which are like one of the most endangered marine mammals in the world. They're endemic to the Hawaiian Islands, but they are having issues with monk seals coming into fishermen's catches
Yeah.
and conflicts with fishermen. So, and how do you mitigate or manage for the need to have and help bring these monk seals back and expand their populations, but also taking into account like how do you not negate the needs of fishermen for either subsistence or commercial, and the economies that those provide and the food that provides and the opportunities that provides. So how do you kind of try and marry the two to find a common way forward? This is like an
Yeah.
example. And there's other things too about, water quality and habitat needs and private land versus public land. And there's just all different sorts of cool topics that you can get into. If you look close enough, just about anything can be considered a conflict, but it just depends on how you frame it.
Yeah, and who you blame. I'm also curious about something that's come up on this show recently is that folks like myself who come to hunting and fishing later in life, I notice typically when it comes to regulation, folks who are newer to it and younger generations coming up now seem much more have a much more positive relationship to management and regulation and enforcement. So like for myself, like I came into hunting fishing in my 30s. So for me, the wardens were always people I perceived as like, hey, these people are working for me. They're here to help protect my resources. But what I've noticed with older generations is there's a lot of times like a sense of conflict around regulation, like they're trying to take this away from us. They're trying to, so there's a bit of a different relationship with some generationally. So I'm very curious to hear about sort of what you experienced in Hawaii, because Hawaii is culturally so different than mainland North America already, and has a lot of, sensitive cultural issues going on. But also when you go from no license or regulation, trying to like enforce that or bring that up, I imagine you must meet resistance, especially from older generations and stuff. So I'm just kind of curious what you uncovered in doing that work and talking with folks about it.
Yeah, it was actually very, very interesting. So my undergraduate research project then kind of stemmed further into a larger NOAA survey that kind of looked more in detail at that topic in general. So I'm going to kind of combine the two because they're along the same lines. But essentially what we gathered through my research and then the follow-up research was that, yes, there was a lot, like you mentioned earlier, culturally and historically, there's a lot of distrust between the locals, local Hawaiians and local people towards government agencies in the islands. However, people did see the need for managing the resources and did see a need for better management of the resources. There was some discrepancy between who you talked to on whom was the entity best equipped to do that, whether or not it was traditional methods or more modern methods. But when it really got down to the nitty gritty, the issue that people seemed to have with a license wasn't whether or not they were going to have to pay some fee to access the resources or have ability to access the resources. It was that they didn't trust where the money was going to go.
Mm.
They were concerned that the money was going to go to the general fund and not put back into the resource. So we found that basically in doing that survey, saying, if you were charged, how much money would you be willing to pay? And it ranged from like $5 to $50, and it usually landed somewhere around 15 or 20 that people were on average willing to pay. And would you be more or less supportive if you knew where that money was going to, and it wasn't going to a general fund, it was going to a dedicated fund specific to non-commercial fisheries management? Support for that license increased significantly. And then we even got further into the nitty-gritty about like if it went to infrastructure like boat ramps, or if it went to research, or if it went to enforcement. And we actually found that there was some of the highest support for a fishing license if it went towards enforcing current rules, because they seem to have a perception, and I would probably say it's a fairly accurate perception, that a lot of the enforcement was fairly understaffed. And so a lot of the current regulations that are in place were just kind of pieces on, papers that weren't actually being enforced. So they were very supportive of a fishing license that went towards enforcement of current regulations to better protect the resources. So it really narrowed down to hypothetically, they'd be willing to pay if they knew that the funds were going back into the resource.
Ellary, it occurs to me as I listen to you speak that you have you work in some areas that there's like, how do I say this? For me, I'd almost feel like a little uncomfortable. Like you're taking on things that like are like, ooh, kind of, I don't want to say taboo, but like uncomfortable a little bit. It's
yes.
It's you must have a high tolerance for that, because I would be cringing a little bit, I think.
It's definitely interesting as someone, again, like living in Hawaii and working in Hawaii for 6 years, but not being from Hawaii. That was definitely a barrier that had to be overcome. And I think a lot of it, and particularly my time in Hawaii, and I think it has helped me a lot in moving forward with CSF and the work that I do with CSF related to predator management, which I think is also another kind of a sometimes cringy area to work in.
Sure is.
But it has really taught me to listen and to try and understand people's perspectives and trying to find commonalities. So when I was working in Hawaii, I didn't try to even touch on the subject of, or even try and portray that the survey was going to try and tell people what to do. I more so tried to explain that it was an opportunity for folks to express their thoughts and their opinions, and to have some type of representation.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't me trying to say, hey, the way you're managing your fisheries is wrong. It's not me or anyone saying that you're messing it all up because you don't have a license. That's not at all the case. This is, hey, here's an opportunity. Here's a way to maybe address this issues that we're seeing, because we want the fisheries to be managed sustainably in perpetuity. That's a commonality that we have. So let's maybe try and find some ways to go about that. And at the end of the day, it's Hawaii's choice to do what it wants to do. And it's just my opportunity to try and bring as much information and perspectives to the table, to make sure that whatever decision is ultimately made is in the best interest of the people and the resource.
I was out on Molokai for a couple of weeks earlier in the year, and doing some hunting out there, and heading back out to Kauai later this month, which I'm pretty excited about for a couple of weeks. And
Heck yeah.
Yeah. So I'm kind of interested, just generally speaking. I'm curious if you have, and I understand if you don't really want to comment on it too, but big picture, what is the state of Hawaii's fisheries, and how do you feel about that? Now that you have some perspective and some time away from it all. I'm just curious, because it is such a complex place with such complex cultural and social issues there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's something, I have been away from it for a couple of years, so I don't necessarily think I could comment on the current state of it. I think that there's always people that are doing more research, and they're always figuring more things out, and they're always trying to improve and make sure that the resources are there sustainably. So I think that if anything, positive progress has been made in that regard, and just a basic understanding, because it is such a complex ecosystem. But that ecosystem and the management, particularly in Hawaii, due to the cultural ties, cannot be separated from the traditional ways of thinking or the traditional management practices. It will not be successful ultimately if the two are separated. They need to be treated as a collective and as in conjunction with, to be able to make sure that the people of Hawaii are accepting and willing to participate and willing to adhere to whatever regulations or traditional management practices are put in place for those resources.
Yeah. Bring us up to your work with the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation. Tell us what you do there. Tell us about them first, I guess, maybe like who are they? What is the mandate there? And then tell me about your work with them as well.
Happy to. So the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation, or CSF, is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that works generally at the state and federal levels of government to advance and protect hunting, fishing, trapping, recreational shooting, and science-based wildlife management. We do that primarily through 3 different levels. We have what we call our sportsmen's caucuses, which at the federal level is known as our Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus, which is essentially a group of like-minded members of Congress that are pro-hunting, fishing, trapping, and recreational shooting. Take that model down to your governors, and we have our Governor Sportsmen's Caucus, same tagline, same mission, but just with our governors. And then take that down to the state level, and we have a state legislative sportsmen's caucus in officially 50 states as of the end of 2022. Hawaii was our only holdout. But Keely Hopkins on the Pacific Coast, my counterpart on the Pacific Coast, was able to finally get one on the books. So we are officially at 50 sportsmen's caucuses at the state level throughout the country. So again, same thing as the congressional level and the governor's level. It's state legislators that come together over a common love of hunting, fishing, trapping, and recreational shooting.
I guess you don't have like numbers handy, but like for people who are wondering, what kind of percentage of our, like, you know, looking at the House or the Senate, like, are there many members that are supportive? I would just imagine so many are so far removed from that kind of an outdoor lifestyle that it would almost be something they're oblivious to, or because of their constituency, are they sometimes forced to be hip to these issues? Like, what is it like to try to communicate with those, you know, people, I guess our legislature, about these issues, or our governors? Like, how many of them are interested in these things?
Yeah, so I'm trying to think. Let's see. We have approximately 250 members of the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus, representing just about 50 states at our Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus, which it actually is the largest caucus on the Hill in D.C. So that's pretty significant.
Wow.
And that's where CSF started at the congressional level, and then seeing the success that we had collectively with that model at the congressional level, then we started expanding it out to the states and to the governors. So it started on the Hill. It's kind of progressed from there. Some states are a little bit further along than others. Some states it took a little while, you know, just bandwidth and interest and whatnot. But yeah, the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus is the largest on the Hill, and with approximately roughly 250 members last counted.
Wow. Okay, that's really nice to hear. I worry a lot about threats to kind of our way of life, and wondering often, like, if it's something that's secure in the future. But it sounds like the kind of work you guys are doing is helping to really ensure that we're being represented, at least. And that these issues are put in front of these lawmakers.
We'll get right back to the show in a moment, but first, I've got some good news about the WildFed TV show. You can now stream both seasons 1 and 2 on demand at myoutdoortv.com. That's myoutdoortv.com. MyOutdoorTV.com. My Outdoor TV is Outdoor Channel's premium online subscription service. They host thousands of episodes of hunting and fishing content, making this a great subscription service for anyone interested in the outdoors. But if you just want to see WildFed, grab yourself a free trial subscription and then check out all 20 episodes at no charge at all. If you decide to keep it, it's just $9.99 a month. We're currently in production for Season 3 of WildFed, which should start airing around the beginning of 2023. Hey, thanks again for all your incredible support. If you haven't already, I can't wait for you to see the show.
Absolutely. That's definitely a fair assessment. And I would say as equal parts to making sure that these issues are in front of our members of Congress, I would also say it's equally important to just be an education opportunity, because more often than not, we're doing just more educating on these issues than anything else. They're very busy people and they deal with a lot of things, and that's just legislators in general, not just in DC, but in our state capitals. And they more often than not in our state capitals have jobs outside of being public servants, and more often than not, they can't necessarily put the time into understanding every single issue that is presented in front of them in a day, let alone a week or a whole legislative session. So the mass majority of what we do is to try and make sure that they understand the issues that are pertinent to our mission, to be able to make educated decisions and understand how those will be impacting their constituents, and also kind of what they individually stand for.
Do you guys have to work as like a backstop or a bulwark to, are there pretty regular threats to hunting, fishing, trapping, recreational shooting that are tucked into legislation all the time? Are you guys having to, are you guys watchdogs for that, or are you more just on education, about the sort of lifestyle and the issues that emerge? Does that make sense? Are you guys actively having to deal with threats from, say, the Humane Society of America or something like that? Or is it not that is it not like that? It's more that you're just educating on behalf of sportsmen in general?
I'd say it's the answer D, all of the above.
Okay.
And it also very much depends on the state. So some states on like the West Coast, for example, we play a lot more active role than say some states maybe in the Midwest, just because of the issues that are being faced. Like California's issues are very, very different from say like North Dakota's issue, right? And those are very, very different from say Connecticut's issues, which are very different from Georgia's issues. So while each state definitely has its own things that that we have to pay attention to, those vary very much in their, what I would argue, severity, as far as the bad things go, from state and from just the interests. In my region in particular, New Mexico and Colorado tend to keep me very, very busy. And those have been specifically related to things like predator management in particular. That seems to be hot button issues. And those are also states that have fairly large anti-hunting and animal rights presence in the state as well. So it kind of just depends on where the antis are focusing their efforts and where they feel like they can make a lot of progress. They've made some significant progress in Washington this past year. They're trying to do some pretty big things in Oregon. And again, my focus is much more knowledgeable on things happening in the West, just because that's kind of where my focus is, being that I cover the Rocky Mountain region for CSF. So I'm less familiar with things that are happening in other regions, but enough familiar to know that it definitely varies by state.
Could you describe some of those things that you just said, some of those significant things that they're trying to accomplish in some of those states, just so that the listeners kind of have a sense? Because I think sometimes the people listening are so busy doing their thing that it's like maybe not always on our radar what's happening, especially in states far from where we live,
Oh, absolutely. So I will say that we're starting our 2023 legislative session. So a lot of things are just starting to kind of show up, or will be showing up very, very soon. And so I can kind of lead you to what the things that we dealt with last year, or things that we're kind of anticipating this year. But last year in Washington State, the commission, Game and Fish Commission, I believe that's what they call it in this Washington State, but basically their commission, their wildlife commission, they don't have a spring bear hunt anymore. So that's something that's recently that we just lost in the state. In New Mexico 2 years ago, trapping it was lost on all public land in the state. So basically,
Wow.
we lost by one vote in the House. That basically made it illegal for people to trap on public lands, and that was just directly after the commission had basically found a happy medium of putting out a bunch of new regulations on trapping placement and proximity to busy areas. And they even kind of outlined some high traffic areas for recreation, like your hikers and your mountain bikers and things like that, to where you couldn't trap. So they really tried to find a happy medium that I think would have been really, really successful in mitigating some of the concerns that were being expressed in the state. But instead of giving those regulations and those changes and those compromises a chance to come and show positive progress, they went straight to the legislature and just banned all trapping on public land. So that was pretty disheartening for the outdoor sporting community in the state, because a lot of effort and time and energy was spent in working with the commission and finding what was thought to be a good compromise for what the express concerns were, to then basically have those interests just say, nope, it's not enough, and go to the legislature and push it through by one vote.
Wow, it's got to be hard when that's part of your lifestyle practice. It's something you do, trapping on public lands, and then suddenly it just evaporates on you. Yeah. Wow.
Yep.
Is there any hope of enshrining some of these things into our state constitutions in order to keep something like that from being able to happen elsewhere?
Yes. So what that is basically constitutional amendments for right to hunt, fish, and harvest wildlife. Currently, we have, I believe it's 23 states with the hunting and fishing, right to hunt and fish and harvest wildlife included in their state constitution. Utah was the most recent one that did it in 2020. But it started with Vermont. Trying to think when Vermont did it. Pretty sure it started with Vermont. But basically it's done by kind of a ballot measure to expand the state constitution to include that. But that is a wonderful opportunity to, like you said, enshrine those rights, should the language be well thought out. But it's definitely not an option for all states. Some states are I don't want to say too far gone, but it would be a much more significant of an endeavor in some of the states that would need it most. And they're not cheap. They require a lot of coordination and often marketing, because at the end of the day, if you want to sell a ballot measure in a state that you think you have a good chance, but you need to kind of get some of those folks that might be on the fence, it's going to come down to marketing and the narrative that you create around this ballot initiative or constitutional amendment. So it very much depends on the state and kind of where things are at, and how much money and time and effort you are willing to spend and have to spend, knowing that some of these states that it might be more beneficial to have these types of things in are probably the states that you're going to get the most resistance, and you're going to have to kind of battle it out in the narrative, so to speak.
I imagine that the way these things break down state by state is probably a lot like how partisan voting breaks down. I mean, I imagine if we looked at a red-blue map kind of a thing, you'd sort of be able to tell which states are which, I'm guessing.
Yeah, probably. I mean, I can list off a couple here just looking at our website, so I'm not misquoting you. But, we have Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, Idaho, Kansas, Louisiana, Minnesota, Montana, North Carolina, Nebraska, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, Wisconsin, Wyoming, and there's a couple more in there that I'm just kind of giving you a flavor.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say so. But again, these are also states that I think had a little bit more forethought and kind of seeing what was happening in some other states and wanted to make sure that they kind of got these things situated before the fight really came to them and came to their state. I know Utah in particular, that was a big driving force for the constitutional right to hunt and fish amendment. Was just seeing kind of what was happening in states around them, California, New Mexico, Oregon, things of that nature, and just really wanting to make sure that these opportunities and these lifestyles and these wildlife management tools were going to be available as demographics or as opinions kind of shifted and people were either more exposed to the outdoors or less exposed to the outdoors.
Right. Yeah, because there's such a huge demographic shift underway, and it's it's interesting, like you said, kind of getting it in there as an amendment early before things change too dramatically. Once you have a state amendment to the Constitution like that enshrines those rights, how indelible is that? How is that must be something that can be changed. I imagine it's challenging, but what does that look like? How strong a measure is it?
Well, fairly strong. To my knowledge, there hasn't been any challenges to date for the constitutional right to hunt and fish amendments in any state. So I think that kind of speaks volumes right there that hasn't been challenged or revoked or anything of that nature, to the best of my knowledge. There's definitely been times where there's been attempts to kind of encroach on those and kind of like test them, but they have all failed. But there's been no direct, to the best of my knowledge, there's been no direct challenges that have been successful or anything of that nature related to those amendments once they are approved.
Wow. I'd love to hear about your work in predator management. And this is one of those places, like you said, it can be kind of a hot button issue. Well, not kind of, it definitely is one. I think in the last several years, a lot's come out about the history of predator management in the United States. And obviously it was a very blunt tool early in, particularly in how we managed wolves and bears and things like that in the past. And I would assume it's become a much finer edged tool over the years. But what's the sort of landscape of predator management now? And what's your work specifically look like in that area?
Yeah, so predator management right now is obviously very, very different than how it was, like you alluded to, kind of towards the beginning of our history with the predators. And if you hear my puppy whining in the background, I apologize.
I love it.
She's I have a little wired hair Vizsla, and she is less than amused that she is in the kennel right now. So I apologize.
A lot of dog lovers listening in right now.
Yeah. She's like 8 months old, so she's got a lot of tude right now.
I've got an 8-month-old puppy at home too, so a plot hound that a lot of energy. So I get you.
Yeah. So I basically came into predator management mostly because of the region in which I cover. So for CSF, being the policy lead for the Rocky Mountain region, that includes Idaho, Montana, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Wyoming. So it kind of would make sense that I would ultimately be an individual that deals a lot with predators and predator management and predator conflict in my region. So it's very different, and I think that's a big narrative that we have to push back on as a community, is that there's a lot of misconceptions out there about managing predators and what that actually looks like. And it's not just about managing populations, but it's also about managing and mitigating conflict wherever possible. And that isn't a situation in which it's an eradication effort or anything along those lines. And hunters get a bad rap because were pointed to as the reasons why these populations got so bad, right? But the flip side of that is that we're also the reason why these populations have come back to the degree in which they have come back, right? It's our wildlife funding. It's our funding systems that have really provided the baseline for being able to bring these species and these populations back from what they had gotten to. And we have a better understanding of what that looks like and the needs of that. And it's really important to be able to maintain that the state fish and wildlife agencies are the best agencies, are the best entities to manage those resources. They're the ones with the most up-to-date data. They're the ones that understand the intricacies and the nuances of their states and their state politics and their state, social perceptions. They are the ones that are best equipped to manage the resources in
Is there a push for
perpetuity.
someone else to manage
Well, I
this?
think that's pretty evident in with the grizzly bears as well as the wolf, right? The wolf was delisted.
You're saying as opposed to them being federally regulated with
Right.
the ESA.
Right.
Okay,
so
gotcha. Yeah.
so there's definitely pushes to try and make sure that by keeping them listed under ESA, that precludes any hunting of those, management of those entities, more or less. But at the end of the day, these populations have rebounded significantly to a point where it's gotten to where we can let the states manage them and properly be able to mitigate these issues.
You're very diplomatic. I can tell, you do the kind of environments that you work in. You must have to be very, you have to choose your words carefully. But I want to whatever degree you're willing to answer this, sometimes it feels like what I see is that the ESA gets a little bit weaponized against hunting, and maybe in contrast to the spirit of what it was created for, because obviously it's a very powerful tool, but then it's a way to also kind of preclude certain things from happening anymore when maybe, like you're saying, the state, we get to a point where the state could come in and management. There's been a recovery of a species, at least in an area where now the state could manage that and there could be a hunt, but folks aligned against that try to use the ESA in a way that maybe it wasn't intended to be used. Is that fair to say? Is that what we're talking about here?
Yeah, that's definitely one part of it. I think that's a fair assessment, and it's one of those situations that is pretty difficult because there are absolutely times in which ESA is absolutely necessary. And just like anything, what the intent of it is good. Nobody, hunters, anglers, trappers, nobody wants to see any wildlife go extinct. Like that's not the goal. That's not anything that anyone wants. But there definitely is a history, and there definitely is a strategy in using ESA, I think, as a way to what am I trying to say here? Trying to use ESA in order to achieve individual or agendas. And I think in addition to ESA, I think another one that's pretty interesting that ties into ESA is the Equal Access to Justice Act. Are you familiar with that at all?
I'm not. I'd love to hear about that.
So the Equal Access to Justice Act basically permits the recovery of attorneys' fees in lawsuits against the federal government. So more often than not, a lot of these anti-hunting or animal rights organizations will sue the federal government over some ESA violation. But through the Equal Access to Justice Act, they're actually able to recover their fees for if they are basically awarded any type of win in that lawsuit. So they don't have to win in totality. They just have to basically prove that one aspect of it was granted in their favor, and they're able to basically recover their fees. So then you have these organizations that are fundraising over these issues, say the wolf, right? Wolves are going to disappear. We need your help to save the wolf. Donate $20 now. Great. I love wolves. I understand what the narrative that they're telling me, and I want to donate $20. Great. I donate $20. Say one aspect of the lawsuit related to the wolf issue is granted in favor of the animal rights or the complainants. They're able to recover their litigation fees or their fees essentially. And so all that money that they've fundraised for off of this issue is basically now put into the coffers.
Wow. Because
So
there's a lot. It's almost kind of frightening sometimes when I hear about the budgets of some of these animal rights organizations, just how much money they have accumulated to. And I imagine, because as you sort of just alluded to, you put something in front of somebody with no nuance. Like, do you think there
right.
should be wolves? And it's like, well, yeah, okay, donate. And then people do out of the goodness of their heart, and they not understanding the totality of the issues or the subtlety and the nuance, and definitely not because there has been that sort of concerted effort to portray hunters as wanting, almost like hating these animals, as if they want
Right.
to eradicate them in some way, right?
Right. And I think in general, I think that's where the outdoor sporting community really needs to kind of step up a little bit. And I think we're starting to see the need, and we're starting to understand just how much marketing plays into policies and politics. And how, again, like you said, it's kind of frightening how large some of these budgets are that we're working against. And more often than not, our organizations or the people that are helping are doing this voluntarily. They're not necessarily getting paid. Like, I can think of, particularly in Colorado, like one of the most engaged individuals that I know is involved in just about anything he can be involved in, and he's very effective at what he does. He's completely a voluntary individual, spends his own money to go to these different meetings, spends his own time, his family's time. Like, he is 100% doing it because he cares about it and knows what's at risk, and he's not willing to go down without a fight. And so, like, we definitely have the passion, but it's also, I think, an inherent characteristic flaw of our community is that folks want to be left alone, and folks want to go out into the woods and hunt and fish and get away from the hustle and bustle. And they don't want to, they trust that the agencies are going to necessarily manage the resources, and that their opportunities are going to be there. And they don't want to get involved because it's just not something that, more often than not, members of our community really feel comfortable doing. But in reality, that's really what we need, is those people to begin to engage and to begin to participate, because we're facing an uphill battle as it is, and facing a well-funded machine that really has a formula that is working fairly well, and that we're having to face every year.
That I've never really thought about it in this way, but now that you say it, it's really interesting, because the person typically drawn to hunting and fishing is often that rugged individualists, probably pretty turned off by marketing, doesn't really want to get involved in these social argue, you know what I mean? Like, and then you got the activist type is very socially involved. They tend to develop a lot of connections. They tend to be willing to really go deep into that marketing side. So that I hadn't really thought about the unevenness of the presentation, I guess, before. And then when it comes to predators, one thing that I've noticed is, it seems like often, and maybe it's the bias too of the kind of media that I consume, but it seems like some kind of hunt will be taken away, let's say, with regard to a predator species, and then that state will start to have huge problems with that same predator, right? Like I brought up before.
Funny how that works.
Yeah, like the number of stories I've seen with mountain lions in California in the last couple of years, coming into people's houses, taking people's pets, like all these kind of things. Do those things like ever filter back in? Do people ever like see, or is this just like sort of one of these things where people never make the connection that, like, oh, that's why we're having all of these problems?
Well, I think it's not necessarily that straightforward. I think that people don't necessarily understand the cause and effects because they didn't understand the relationship to begin with, right? So they think that, like, and this is all purely just, just my thought process here, and kind of just contemplating on the cause and effects of it. But you have folks that vote, say, to ban mountain lion hunting in California, right? They vote to ban mountain lion hunting for a variety of personal reasons, right? Whether or not they think hunting is inhumane, they were bought into the narrative that was presented to them, whatever the reason is. But more likely than not, if they voted to ban mountain lion hunting, it's because they didn't understand the relationship between hunting to mountain lion populations, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they were probably fed some lie that was basically saying that mountain lions are going to go extinct. We're going to lose them all to hunting. Do whatever you can to save the mountain lion, more or less. So then now people vote in favor of. Now they start seeing mountain lions in neighborhoods, and they're thinking, "Oh, it worked. I never once saw mountain lions in neighborhoods before, and now we're
Wow.
getting mountain lions in neighborhoods, and this is great. And it's this beautiful, charismatic species, and I just love seeing wildlife in my backyard, right?" And then not understanding that the reason why the mountain lions weren't there in the first place was because we didn't necessarily want them there in the first place because of the conflict and the human safety and the pet safety and all these other issues. And from a population standpoint, like they're being overpopulated in prime habitat, and now they're filtering into these less than optimal areas. And so I think that it's a lot of it is an education, but then the tables tend to turn when it's a mountain lion with their dog, right? Or a mountain
Yeah.
lion with their mom's dog, or a coyote that attacks a kid in broad daylight. Like
I saw a video the other day of a coyote trying to drag a kid away from like a bus stop. I couldn't
right.
believe it, you know?
Right. And so we're starting to see the effects, and it's going from yeah, it's great to see wildlife, but it's good to see wildlife where wildlife is supposed to be, right? And so I think that it's not quite so simple, because in order to understand what it does to take away hunting, you have to understand the role that hunting plays in the management. Otherwise, you don't quite necessarily see that. So, but I definitely do think that there has been some pretty cool things that happened recently in New Jersey. Did you see that they reinstated their black bear hunt?
I was going to say, because another video that I watch at least a couple times a year are those two giant boar bears just battling it out in a suburban neighborhood, smashing garbage cans and cars. And you're like, okay, because living in Maine, we have a big bear population. We have, I got through hunting bears here, became aware of sort of the idea of social carrying capacity versus ecological carrying capacity. And that's one of those distinctions I think people miss. And I imagine they started to become aware of there. But please, tell us about what's going on in Jersey.
Well, the New Jersey banned its bear hunt, and I'm not quite sure, maybe like a couple years ago or so. And they started having an increase in bear populations, an increase in bear conflict. And as a result, the governor actually reinstated the black bear hunt this year because of the increase in populations and an increase of conflict and the need for mitigation. So there definitely is hope. I mean, that's a huge win for the outdoor sporting community and hunters and bear management in general for New Jersey. That just happened. I think it was on December 6th of 2022. So there definitely is hope, and there definitely is some people understanding the impacts that will have. But there was also pretty significant engagement in New Jersey from the hunting community, with basically saying, like, if you do this, this is going to happen, and like, what are you going to do then? And it kind of played out that way, and the governor decided that it was better to have the hunt than to not have the hunt.
Yeah, we're in this really challenging, polarized, partisan era right now. I know this has happened before in the United States, and sort of it ebbs and flows, but I certainly grew up in an era that was a lot less politicized. Mm-hmm. And hopefully we kind of filter back towards something like that. But if I was like looking at it based on the current conditions, my concern would be we end up in a time where, half the states have banned hunting altogether, and the other half become sort of holdouts and bastions for this. When you shake your magic 8-ball, do you see a world like that emerge, or do you think that things like what you just described in Jersey become so common that that some of the nuance comes back because people realize, hey, we do need hunters and hunting as part of our bigger picture holistic wildlife management program? Or again, like I just mentioned, do you think that some of these states just take such a hardline stance against it that we could actually have states that no longer allow it at all?
Yeah, and I think that's a fair question. I think it's an interesting question, and I also think it's a question that we might not necessarily be able to foretell. I think it's very interesting because you have a spectrum of perspectives, right? You have on the far one side, you have people that think that humans shouldn't manage wildlife, and that wildlife should just be left to roam and do whatever it wants, and we're just kind of spectators in it. And then you have the other side where people feel like it needs to be managed and it needs to be mitigated and it needs to be um, sustainably managed. And so then you have these folks that are the mass majority of folks that kind of are in the middle, but that don't necessarily understand the depths of either side, right? They like wildlife and they like management and they understand the role that hunting plays, but they might not actively participate. So you have most of your population kind of in the middle, and that's kind of where all like I keep going back to where this marketing kind of happens. So I think a lot of how things play out is going to kind of play out in not necessarily in the science side of things, but more so in the court of public opinions. And if we're able to better communicate what wildlife management is and what it isn't, and that hunting and fishing and all these things are tools in that. And that at the end of the day, particularly with predators, and I mean also our ungulate species and whatnot, at the end of the day, even if you don't have hunting, you're still going to have animals being killed. It's just going to be the state or the feds doing it and using taxpayer dollars to do it, as opposed to making money by people paying for
Us
the privilege to
paying to
do
do
so.
it. It
Right.
seems though like that one thing that I've noticed is that there's a contingency of folks who don't like that someone would like to do it. It's like
Mm-hmm.
they don't mind, okay, like we're going to have to cull some mountain lions. They just don't want somebody who wants to do it to be out there doing it or something,
Right.
like that's like, to them, that's, morally reprehensible or detestable or whatever it is. And so
Right.
that I don't know how to combat that exactly, but like, what are your sort of suggestions to people how do we do a better job as individuals in representing hunting as a tool in management? Because it's not, it's easy to say you just want to. I get the sentiment because I used to feel like this, like let nature manage itself. But it's like, yeah, zoom out for a second and look at a map of the Earth at night and just look at like this
Right.
we are everywhere. Our grid is everywhere. Our stuff is
Right.
everywhere. Like we can't. Everything's being managed, and so the idea that, and also look at the rest of the world where we don't have, like, the North American model of conservation is unquestionably led to some of the most incredible abundance of wildlife. I mean, you look at
Mm-hmm.
places that don't have a model like this, and it's pretty sad where things can end up. So I think it's a beautiful thing, but how do we represent that better?
Oh, absolutely. Before I get into that, I just want you touched on something that is like a pet peeve of mine, and I just want to highlight it. Is when folks talk about they want to get back to historical levels of a certain species. Like we need historical levels
Right.
of wolves, and we need historical levels of grizzly bears for them to be recovered. And I just want to be like, look, you can only have so many of a population with what the landscape and the habitat can hold. So expecting a landscape that's been cut in half to
Right.
get to historical levels is just, it's not sensible. It's not logical.
You'd have to get back to historical levels of people in those areas.
Correct.
Which no one wants to do, right?
Which we can't do, right? So it's just, it's one of those catchphrases that we hear over and over again about historical levels, like saying that's the benchmark, but that benchmark is you're then taking quote unquote whatever historical levels are and putting that amount onto a significantly smaller area, and that's just not good for anybody, including the wildlife, right? So it's definitely, like you said, checking out the grid and checking out what what it actually looks like. And that's just something, a little tidbit that I wanted to throw in there that I think is challenging that narrative that people get so used to hearing and kind of start to buy into without really understanding fully what that means.
Yeah, because you'd have to deindustrialize the West. You'd have to to shrink populations, remove developments, get rid of college campuses, get rid of all these things that are there now. You can't exactly have historical levels of grizzly bears in places where people are living. I mean, that is just not going to work.
Right. But again, that's this sentiment that we are facing and that we are hearing that people are buying into because they don't. Again, they're being sold this narrative and this imagery and this idea without fully understanding what that actually means or entails or includes.
So what do we do as individuals, and what role do we play in letting our legislature and representatives know how we feel about these things too? Like, is that important? And then like, how do we just better represent? Because what I see a lot of is I see a lot of the back and forth arguments and name calling and all those kind of things going on in the social media realm where you're like, that's not helpful. We're polarized. Because it's not hard to reinforce the image that non-hunters and particularly anti-hunters have of hunters when we become confrontational. So obviously that's not the answer. So like, what do we do? And then do we need to be like writing letters or calling our, Congress people and our governors? Like, how do we handle all that stuff?
So 2 parts. I think what we can do as individuals outside of engaging in the legislative process or in policy is just one is telling your story and explaining to people like why you love hunting, and that's not that's not saying like I just like going out and killing things. Like that's not the narrative that's helpful, right? Like what, like is it the connection to your family? Is it the fact that you get to be outside? Is it the fact that you get to bring home memories and food to feed your family? Like it's trying to convey all of the different things that make you an outdoors person, all of the different things that make you who you are and why you like to do these things. Like I can tell you why I personally love to hunt big game. I can tell you why I love to hunt ducks. There's 2 very different things. I hunt more big game because A, I love to do it, but B, because it puts a lot of food in my freezer. I'm not that great of a duck hunter, so I don't put a lot of food in my freezer, but that is something that I did with my family. And so duck hunting to me is that connection with my family, and going to duck camp is like the highlight of the year for the family. It's bigger than Christmas. It's everyone coming together to hang out without cell phones and without, tablets and this, that, or the other. It's the camaraderie. It's the family. So being able to talk to people outside of your social network, because if we just talk to one another, we're just preaching to the choir more or less. So it's about talking to folks outside of your social networks. Like I have, for example, I have a sticker on my work laptop because I travel fairly often for my job. And it says, I hunt, I fish, I vote. That's it. That's the only sticker on my laptop. And I can't tell you, I can count more often the times that I've been out in public that people haven't asked me about my sticker than have asked me by my sticker. So just that simple thing right there is an opening where people will say, what about your sticker? Like, I don't understand. Or they're like, oh, that's interesting. Like, but it's a way to kind of broach the conversation. And it's an interesting way to kind of bring it up and to talk about things. And I've had several conversations with people that had absolutely zero idea that wildlife was being actively managed by a state agency.
Right.
Like that's the like baseline understanding that people don't have. Like they had this understanding, like, oh, I don't like hunters because they just sit in bushes and they just jump out and kill anything, and it's unsuspecting animals and it's not fair and this, that, and the other. And I'm like, hold on, like, do you know that there's like seasons and like there's all these different things in place?
Biologists even involved in the whole thing?
Yeah, like it's not just this willy-nilly system where I can go out and shoot anything I want. Like that's not at all this system. And so basically even just helping people to understand that hunters are operating within set parameters that are set by science, by state wildlife agencies. So we are actively helping to manage a resource. We're not operating outside of the confines, and anyone that operates outside of those confines, those aren't hunters, those are poachers, and they're very different. And being able to distinguish between hunters and poachers within the greater narrative, I think, is critically important, because often the two get conflated with people that don't necessarily understand in their minds kind of what those the things that separate those two. So I think just telling your story, voting is huge, and I can tell you that I've always voted, but it wasn't until this job where I fully understood the importance of voting and participating in that process as an individual, because ultimately at the end of the day, the people that we vote for are going to be making decisions on your behalf. So you need to make sure that you're doing your darndest to get people out there that represent to the best of their abilities and to your behalf. And because again, there's teachers, there's doctors, there's lawyers, there's construction workers, there's business owners, there's all sorts of people in the legislature that don't have backgrounds in wildlife or management. And at the end of the day, you need to make sure that they have a basic understanding of kind of the issues that you care about. And voting is the first line to trying to get the right people in the right positions. And if you don't take that opportunity, then I can guarantee you that the other side is.
Does CSF or somebody else provide a tool for someone like me to see what issues are being voted on, or what representatives, how they vote on these issues? How do we know that?
Yeah. So we don't necessarily have a system that tracks like voting on like who votes for what. What we do have is a free tool to the public. It's called Tracking the Capitals. It's available on our website. Again, it's a free service that we provide, where you can actually go in and track states or bills and subject matters that are of interest to you. So say you're a hound hunter in Idaho, and you care about hound hunting issues in Idaho only. You can go into the system and basically select all of these different tags, and it narrows your search, and you'll get daily emails where anything that within your proximity that pings, within your parameters that you set that pings, you'll get an email with that to your personal email, and you can go in and read the bill, see who's sponsoring it, and then as things get voted on, you can go through that and see like, it was in Natural Resources Committee and it was passed with a 5-2 vote, and you can go and see who voted. So there's a way to kind of go find it, but there's not necessarily like one running document with all the different bills, because CSF tracks like between the federal and the 50 different states and the commissions and all of that. We track over 3,000 bills every year. And it's increasing every year, it seems. Yeah. So there's definitely ways for individuals to be able to see what's going on in their state or their region, or even if they want to look nationwide, but they want to do, again, specific to certain topics, they can work within this Tracking the Capitals to be able to kind of get pings on when different bills are dropping and progress is being made or not made, to keep an eye on these things. And then to get back to your other question on should the outdoor sporting community be getting involved? Without a doubt, absolutely. I can tell you, as an individual that's works for an organization based out of DC but lives in Idaho, I can write the best letter or give the best testimony of my life, and it won't hold the same weight as one of the legislators' constituents. Yeah. And so we need this outdoor sporting community to engage on issues. We need the outdoor sporting community to show up when called upon, to really help with this, because it's not something that we can do alone. And I think a great example of this, of just the power of having your average everyday sports person show up. Was last year in Colorado, there was a bill that was looking to ban all harvest of mountain lions, bobcats, and lynx in the state. Fun fact, lynx is an endangered species in the lower 48, so you can't harvest it anyways. But again, it was a tactic to pull at the heartstrings. And also, if lynx were to ever be delisted in the lower 48 or in Colorado, it would preclude them from being able to have a season on them.
Right.
So there is that bill, and we were more or less scrambling because the makeup of the committee could have gone either way. And we rallied the troops, and we called upon outdoors people, and it wasn't just houndsmen, it wasn't just, cougar hunters, it was anybody that cared about hunting and fishing, because this is where it starts, right? If I need to show up for you and you need to show up for me, it's not I don't hunt mountain lions, so it doesn't impact me. Well,
Right.
Do you hunt deer? It impacts you. Do you hunt at all? This impacts you. So we need to be able to show up for each other, so that way when it comes for, comes for duck hunting, or it comes for this or that, like, they show up for you.
Yeah, because those are just low-hanging fruit, right? Going after
Right.
mountain lions is a low-hanging fruit for these groups, but it's not like that's where they want to stop exactly. So, piece by piece, they just try to disassemble it.
Right, death by 1,000 cuts. So in this, we basically got, it was below freezing at the Capitol. I think it was in like February, if I recall correctly. But we had over 200 people show up at the Capitol in opposition of this bill. And we did, I think it was over 3 hours of public testimony of people basically saying, like, this is bad news. Like, please don't do this. And all for a variety of different reasons. It wasn't, you had the people like myself that do this on a more regular basis, but then you had people that you could tell had no plans on testifying, but they were inspired while being there and took it upon themselves to stand up and put in their 3 minutes of talking and just talking about what mountain lions hunting meant to them, and what taking it away would mean for their cattle or for their family or for this, that, or the other. And we actually ended up killing that bill in committee because of the sheer volume and support and show out that we had on that bill. And we weren't sure we were going to be able to do it. And in fact, one of the votes that we got that actually ultimately ended up killing the bill, the individual, the legislator, basically said that she was amazed that 3 hours later that they were still taking public comment on this bill, and that was the reason why she voted in opposition of it, and that they needed to go back to the drawing board and better assess what they were trying to do with the bill. So I don't think that would have been possible had we not had the outdoor sporting community really rally around this issue and really come together and drive through blizzard conditions to make it there.
Yeah.
Like, it was, I can't imagine if we had a good weather day. Like, it would have been
Right.
it would have been crazy. But again, sports people are, if anyone was to show up during a blizzard and be able to stand outside for hours, it's hunters. So
yeah, it's par for the course. That's really good stuff, and we'll put links in the show notes to the website tool you described as well, because that sounds incredibly helpful. And in closing, I just tell us how you said you guys are a 501c3. How do we support you? How important is the role of individuals' support in what you guys do? And tell us sort of all about like how we find you and stay abreast of what you guys are doing.
Absolutely. So you can just Google us. We have a lovely website, just like about everybody else these days, Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation, or congressionalsportsmen.org. There's a different variety of different ways where individuals can support us. We have what's called the Sporting Society, which is a little bit higher of a monetary commitment, but you get there's a whole website that kind of breaks down what that means and the benefits that you get for being a member of the sporting society. And additionally, if that wasn't what your interest was, and that's not kind of where you wanted to keep being involved, you just kind of wanted to do a one-time donation, then again, on the CSF website, there's a donate now button that you can click, which would be extremely helpful, and anything helps, in all honesty. And even if you can't necessarily donate monetarily, if you want to get more involved with your state sportsmen's caucuses, if you want to get more involved with, just tracking our issues, you can sign up for our newsletter. That's free. We send it out every week. There's issues there from every different region in the country, highlights of things that we're working on. If there's issues that we think it might be really beneficial for the outdoor sporting community to engage on, a lot of times we'll highlight them there. Sometimes we'll say, hey, there's this bill happening. We really need your help. Sign up here or comment here or what have you. So that's a good way to kind of stay engaged. And also, we have our different, so again, like I mentioned, I cover the Rocky Mountain regions for CSF, but there's a me in every region. There's a upper Midwest, lower Midwest, Southeast, Mid-Atlantic, Northeast. So if you're in any one of those areas, if you want to go on our website and you want to get more involved, you want to see how you can help out, if you just go to our About page and go down to staff, there's breakdown of where everyone is at and the different states that everyone covers. And I would highly suggest you reach out to your regional representative, and they would be more than happy to kind of let you know on ways to potentially be involved and where it can't be helpful. And we're always needing local support and always needing people to show up for hearings or commission meetings or whatnot, or just even spreading the word on issues. So there's a lot of different ways. If you want to donate monetarily or donate with your time and volunteerism, there's definitely opportunities abound. And I also want to say, if this job sounds like something that may be of interest to you, we are currently hiring 2 positions, one, I believe, for the Southeast and one for the Midwest. If you want to deal with hunting and fishing issues from a policy standpoint and work with your state caucuses and also get to do some pretty fun stuff throughout the year, we are hiring. And so I'd highly suggest you going on our website and checking out those job postings and applying if you think it might be a good fit.
Wow, that was awesome. There's a lot there. And it seems like that everybody should get on that newsletter, because it seems like that'd be incredibly valuable to stay abreast of some of this stuff. And we'll certainly at WildFed put a donation in as well. And just want to say thank you for what you do as an organization, but individually as well, because it's really easy, I think, for a lot of hunters to feel like just a passive caught up in a wave of what's happening and not necessarily knowing how to be active, in these kind of ways. So I just thank you for everything you shared. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for the work you're doing. And we're going to definitely see what we can do to help promote this a bit. So I really appreciate your time.
Appreciate you guys. Appreciate what you're doing. I've watched a couple of your episodes online, and you guys are doing a really wonderful job in providing folks the opportunity to see a different perspective of hunting and gathering and all the things in between. And it's really wonderful to be able to show the diversity within the outdoor sporting community. So thank you for helping to do that.
Yeah, Ellary, it's been great talking to you today. I really appreciate it.
Perfect. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks for listening to the WildFed podcast. You can help us grow this show by subscribing and leaving us a rating and review. It ensures better rankings and more advertiser interest, which translates directly into better shows, more awesome guests, and a constant stream of fresh new content. Have a podcast guest or topic suggestion, or maybe a hunting, fishing, or foraging trip you'd like to host the WildFed TV show for? Email us at info@wild-fed.com. If you still haven't seen season 1 or 2 of the WildFed TV show, go to myoutdoortv.com, grab yourself a free trial subscription, and then check out all 20 episodes. Season 3 of WildFed premieres on Outdoor Channel in early 2023. And be sure to visit our website, wild-fed.com, to check out our store for WildFed shirts, hoodies, hats, stickers, and more. WildFed. Food is all around you.